Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you for coming, whether it's morning or afternoon where you are. And as Brianna said, we are going to share information here specifically about the Michigan Vaccine Project at Michigan State University Extension. This project is, I will say up front, funded by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. And we'll have questions, I believe, after our breakout discussion. So if you could hold off until then, we'll do questions then. So a brief, let me see, didn't go to next slide. Okay, there we go. So brief introduction, my name is Maggie Magoon. I'm a health specialist at Michigan State University Extension. I also work with the Physician Peer Education Immunization Project, and that'll come up a little bit later in the presentation. And I'm also part of this group with Rural Families Speak. And I'll hand it over to Jim to introduce himself. We both work with the Michigan Vaccine Project, or MVP.
Yeah, thanks for having us today. My name's Jim Monahan. I'm the Health Communications Manager on the project.
All right, so today we're going to go over a brief background, how we identified the need in the target population, our methods and results, and then an overview summary of conclusions and lessons learned before we move into our group discussion. So as I mentioned, we are funded by the CDC and MDHHS. This is a 3-year, $7 million grant. The programming and outreach predominantly happened in the latter 2 years. So the first year was getting up and running and hiring so many people. And this is part of what we call the COVID funds, which many states got. And we didn't just cover COVID, though. The outreach covered all vaccines or immunizations. So some of the main reasons we were funded with Extension, we are a statewide network. So that was a great benefit to reach as many people in Michigan as possible. We, as part of this project, have project coordinators, instructors, educators, specialists in several different counties throughout the state. As with many other extension offices, we are a trusted voice for evidence-based information. This project is multidisciplinary and cross-institutional, and I'll talk about more of that in a bit. And we serve rural, underserved, racial and ethnic minority populations. So we, as far as extension and this project, and we'll talk more about the grouping of people that we reached as well. So for need in 2021, Michigan lagged far behind the national average for COVID-19 vaccinations. The highest rate of COVID cases were among youth aged 10 to 19, and childhood immunizations in Michigan, the rates declined substantially. That was a nationwide trend during the pandemic, and we're still trying to catch up. We've made a lot of progress, but still trying to catch up with that. Again, addressing vulnerable populations that are reached by Extension and this grant with youth, families, all adults, but particularly we reached out to those over 65. Rural was our main focus. We also did have some other groupings of suburban and urban, but rural was our main reach, and those who are historically underserved. So the 4 overarching efforts of MVP, or our main 4 objectives, the Child and Youth Institute, that was one institute. And then when I say cross institute, also the Health and Nutrition Institute. Those were the main 2 institutes, but we also reached out to other disciplines and involved them as well. So the 4 overarching efforts, the Child and Youth, or CYI, youth program instructors provided educational programming for rural youth and families. Under that, the youth ambassadors, and I'll talk more about the youth ambassadors in a little bit. They ran a statewide youth-defined, youth-led education campaign that was directed mainly towards other youth and peers, but also family and their local communities. Under the HNI side, the health program instructors provided educational campaign for rural adults then. And the 4th, the statewide print and media campaign, for the most part, that was directed towards adults, but I will share in a moment the youth side of that as well. So for youth programming, we were involved with vaccine presentations, which would be considered more of a direct service. And we were involved in 82 of those, reaching over 2,000 youth. And for community events, those were more what would be considered indirect activities or kind of like tabling events. So some of the examples of community organizations we worked with on the youth side were schools, science centers, after school and daycare centers, career centers, libraries, park events, and county and state fairs also. So we did 38 of those community events for a reach of over 20,000 youth. And 3 of the activities that were very popular at those events, one was the germoscope, which you can see on the image there. And that was a grassroots creation from one of our program coordinators that just ended up being fantastic. It had a lot of iterations, but ended up being really spiffy. And so youth would look through the simulated microscope and see different petri dishes where there were germs on some, and then the impact of a vaccination on them, and it just went over really well. The gloves off challenge is quick. The kids wear gloves and they put shaving cream on them and then try to take the gloves off without getting the quote germs or the shaving cream on them. And it's an education about that, as well as making sure you wash your hands even if you're wearing gloves too, because some of those germs spread. The polio challenge is an activity, a simulated activity where youth get to experience in a simulated way some of the difficulties that people with polio may experience. So for instance, limited mobility, and then there's an education component about polio and the benefits of getting vaccinated against polio. And one of the key components also of both institutes' work were community partnerships. So over that 2-year period of main programming, the youth side developed 37 community partnerships for youth programming, which is fantastic. So again, under CYI, the youth ambassadors, we recruited 30 statewide ambassadors. This was a very diverse group. Several of them were bilingual or multilingual. A few were born in other countries. The age was varying. So we had a really diverse group that we felt were able to then reach, give a broader perspective. So it was a youth-led programs and speaking engagements they were involved in. They did 9 over the course of about 1.5 to 2 years, reaching almost 18,500 youth. We also partnered with the Detroit Public Television and the Michigan Learning Channel so that those youth ambassadors created 48 public broadcasting messages with a reach of over 41,000, which is pretty great. They also wrote and submitted conference proposals and presented at those conferences. So it was just a great learning experience for them. That age range was about, I think, 13, 14 to 18 or 19. And then we had a few that aged out and went to college and et cetera. So from the HNI standpoint, we also did direct and indirect services there. So 16 presentations reaching 359 adults, 135 indirect or tabling events, reaching almost 15,000 adults. Some of those community organizations were senior centers, public libraries, food pantries, churches and daycares, councils on aging, health fairs, colleges and universities, and we also partnered with the 4-H or youth side. So you can see that under both institutes, we had that family reach. So if it was a youth event, their parents or the family was there, and also for many of the adult activities, there were family members there. Not so much for the councils on aging and the senior centers, but a lot of those, daycares and other that, there were families involved with that. And on the adult side, 50 community partnerships developed across the state. And again, under the more adult-directed print and media campaign, which we will talk about more right now. As part of the print and media campaign, we had a webinar series, vaccine stories, a podcast, newspaper, radio, website, digital display, and Spotify. And we'll talk quite a bit about our social media outreach as well. So I'll talk about the first couple with webinar series. These are some of the example webinar topics, and some of these we had more than once. So for instance, safely gathering for the holidays, the travel vaccinations, and the misinformation and myths. Those we repeated or were sometimes overlapped or were combined. So across several holidays, travel vaccinations around holidays as well, but also like spring break and summer vacation and things like that. And then also population specific. So for Native American Heritage Month, we had speakers on Indigenous experiences and perspectives on immunization, which could be quite different than some of us have experienced. Then also, like for Men and Women's Health Month, pediatrics, we're going to have one on LGBTQ plus populations. And then we also were vaccine specific. So again, one of our focus was on COVID-19, but that wasn't the only. We talked about other vaccines and immunization as well. So that webinar series, that is an active link. So when you get the slides, you can click on that. The plan was to do about one per month. We have 16 posted right now with 4 remaining in production or coming up before the end of the grant. So for outcomes for that, 96% of the people who participated and reported said they were much more likely to get vaccinated or get their children vaccinated and boosted. 100% reported an increase in knowledge, and 96% reported confidence that vaccines will protect them after they viewed the webinar. So for my vaccine stories, this is an active link also. They were personal stories that were recorded, and some of them were really moving throughout the grant, but especially at the beginning before vaccines were really available to everyone, and there was a lot of loss and impact. Some of those are really meaningful, but we just posted a couple of others that told their stories that are very moving as well. So a broad range of nurses, farmers, law enforcement, military, community members, youth, and some of our own MVP staff, which may have very well motivated them to join the project. So for media campaign, I'm going to turn it over to Jim now.
All right, great. Thanks, Maggie. So for our media campaign, I'm just going to give a little bit more depth on this. We know that we're trying to reach rural audiences, but we're trying to reach young adults and middle-aged adults and older adults. We're really trying to reach everyone. And so we know that everyone has different preferred platforms in which they receive their information. So we really wanted to try to use as many of them as we can to make sure that we were not missing anyone. We created a podcast series. We produced 7 episodes. It wasn't super effective in terms of its reach, but we did feel good about the quality of the product we had produced. We also ran newspaper ads because we know that in rural communities, especially rural newspapers can be an important source of health information, in particular for older adults. We produced at least 12 ads or did some promotional sort of stories through local newspapers. You can see an example of 2 of those ads here on the right. And those had a pretty large reach for us in northern Michigan and southeastern Michigan, some largely rural areas. Radio ads, we also created sort of public service announcements, those vaccine stories that Maggie had just mentioned. We turned those videos into 30-second audio clips that promoted vaccine information through a narrative storytelling manner. And those we were able to reach over 4.5 million people throughout the state. We also did digital display ads. So what that is if you're on a website, you'll see those advertisements that appear on the side or up at the top on near the heading. And those would drive traffic to our website. What was nice with those is we were able to target them specifically in rural counties and also to different websites. So we could have it appear on like foxnews.com or cnn.com, different places that, we wouldn't normally necessarily have access to that audience. We did that by partnering with a marketing company. Then we have our own website, which is a good source of traffic, and our extension educators produce educational articles about vaccine education that we use on the website, and that generated over 11,000 views there as well. And then we know that not everyone is using radio anymore either to listen to music or to get their news. So we also started running those same ads that we ran on radio on Spotify, and we had a fair amount of success there as well. So next slide, please. And this is just a brief overview of our social media platforms. We tried to use everything basically that is out there because we know again that there's just very different demographics and age groups using certain platforms more than others, and we're trying to reach a rural audience of everyone, anyone who is in a rural audience or a family. On the right there, you can see a picture that just shows, that's just a screen capture of part of our Instagram feed. But we tried to use a lot of a mix of images, but a lot of video, video content, which I'll talk a little bit about, performed very well for us. And we tried to keep things sort of like on trend or based on current popular memes, things like that. Next slide, please. So this is just a broad overview, okay, of our social media and our main platforms. But we reached a lot of people through social media, I think, especially since we had no real existing social media channels of our own. We were able to use MSU extensions a bit as a launching off point. But these are all just from our own developed social media accounts. And I think what's interesting, if you look at this, you can see here that TikTok was by far and away where we reached the most people. And that was a new platform for us in extension. But it reached 317,000 people. And then YouTube also was very important for us. Our webinars, those vaccine stories, they all ended up getting put on YouTube. 102,000 there. And then Facebook, Instagram, still pretty strong, I thought, 50,000, 42,000. And then Twitter, we weren't having a whole lot of success with. Here on the right, just as an example, this is the kind of sort of TikTok video or Instagram reel video we would make, where we would take something that, we're counting down the top 5 hottest looks to get your COVID-19 booster in. And that is just a style of video that is popular. And we thought, how can we apply our public health vaccine messaging to that format in a way that is sort of funny, but also educational? And for example, what we found is when we did this, that we got incredible amounts of engagement on that content. So that particular video, for every 100 people who watched it, 40 of them either liked it, shared it, saved it as one of their favorites, had some form of engagement with us that let us know that this connected with them, or they rewatched it again. This video on average was watched, had something like, I think it was the average person who watched it 3 times, which is very interesting. So it meant that people were showing it and sharing it with their friends and that they really liked it, I think. So again, when you look at interactions, it's just amazing to me to see just how effective, in particular, TikTok was for making content that our audience really connected with. 43,000 versus Instagram, which was next at 3,700. Next slide, please. So I'm going to give you we'll give you a little example of sort of what happened. Now, part of the reason those TikTok numbers did so well is because we were doing paid promotional posts. And we actually wanted to do that with Instagram and Facebook as well. But the filters that Meta had been applying to try to stop vaccine misinformation were also stopping our scientifically sound pro-vaccine health information at the same time. And we were never able to get through to them, or in a way that led to this ban being removed. But TikTok was accepting our promotions, as was Spotify. So what ended up happening, we have kind of an interesting case study, I think, where you can see we spent in 2023 about $2,140 promoting posts on social media, but all of that money ended up just going to TikTok. And so here's an example of a video we made. This is just based on a trending meme. Maybe you've seen this yourself, of Bill Hader just sort of happily, excitedly dancing. And we'll play it in just a second. But overall, you can see that, okay, TikTok impressions, they were boosted by 249,000 versus Instagram's 31,000. But it's really the interaction gap that is particularly striking to me, is that it was 38,000 interactions on TikTok versus 1,000 on Instagram. So it's not just the ratio of engagement is so much stronger for us on TikTok. And then what happened with the Bill Hader video, so on Instagram, it got 20 likes and 199 views, but on TikTok, it got 867 likes and nearly 6,000 views. And that was we probably put in somewhere between $50 to $100 to boost it. So for us, that return on investment was huge. And just so you can see, Maggie, can you click? We'll share this video with you so you get a sense of some of the content that we were making.
Move it over here to show you. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Maggie. And you can see, that's sort of like a simple, silly video, but it really did connect with people. It allowed us to pass on a very distinct message about the Tdap vaccine. And yeah, it also didn't take long to make at all. It probably took us about 5 minutes to make. And sometimes with video, I think we think, oh, these are big projects. This is going to be very time consuming or expensive. And that's sort of one of the nice things about these social media platforms is that not only is video in some ways very effective at its reach and engagement, but that it's also not so prohibitive anymore in terms of expense or the skill needed to produce it. Next slide.
All right, well, I'll wrap up, and I think Jim has some comments on this slide too, but we'll provide a little wrap up before we go to the breakout sessions. So some challenges and some strengths we'll talk about. With MSU Extension in the local communities, the vast majority of the time, the communities were really open to hearing information from MSU as a trusted source, up-to-date information, scientifically accurate and evidence-based. But we did have some resistance. And one of I would say the most challenging pushback we got was from one of our districts and one of the counties in that district that said, no COVID-19 information here, or your funding may be in jeopardy. So that was by far the most restrictive. Usually it was a little bit less. So for example, it was sometimes difficult to find people that would speak out about this, even if they were very supportive of vaccines and vaccination. They didn't necessarily feel comfortable speaking in being the face of vaccination in their local community, and we had to respect that, because of course we wouldn't want to put their reputation in jeopardy in their local community. But really, typically the local communities were very interested in not only from like the state level of this project, but we had staff that were known in that community to be well respected. We had local medical experts, as well as people that were working with the physician peer education group I spoke about that overlapped, and using those multiple platforms. But there still were those challenges, and Jim will talk a little bit more about the social media challenges too, and some of those that were restricting vaccine information like he spoke about, and the importance of monitoring comments, misinformation, and people that were trolling us. So we really had to pay attention to that. As far as strengths goes, I'll move on to that, and then Jim, you can speak at the end about strengths and challenges of social media. Again, the collaborative and multidisciplinary nature of working within the communities. The youth ambassadors were just great to get the word out of work they had created and reached youth. Again, the local staff, medical experts across the extension institutes, and we had multiple groups that were represented too. So not only in the participants, but in our own staff, the varying ages, the expertise, the genders, the cultural topics, so that we could, have multiple perspectives. Also, one reason that we believed we were successful is that our main message was awareness and education, so that, we strongly encouraged, strongly recommended getting vaccinated. We certainly communicated the responsibility to oneself about health and their families and the community, but we did not approach it as a place of, from a place of conflict or political alignment. It's certainly not mandating that people got vaccinated. Now, of course, there were groups of people, professionals, that were mandated to get vaccinated, but that was not our message. But it was clear that we were strongly encouraging and strongly recommending that people get vaccinated. Also, one of our strengths was what we believed were transferable techniques and methods to other topics, particularly those that might be polarizing. And that's certainly the case with social media. Extension used social media before MVP and before the pandemic, but I think we really just blew the lid off of the use of social media in outreach and getting the message out, particularly about a polarizing or sensitive, controversial topic. So I'm going to let Jim talk about the social media platforms and promotion effectiveness a little bit as we wrap up then.
Yeah, so just to reiterate basically that the idea was that it was just very hard to work with some of the promotion social media companies and getting our work promoted, and even some of it was initially flagged. And when we were able to get sort of past that, we were never able to get it promoted. The other issue that Maggie mentioned was the comments, and we found, if we were trying to promote one of our webinars or something like that, and we put a post on a Friday, we needed someone to monitor the comments the whole weekend because of certain, unfortunately hateful, maybe vitriolic comments that would be directed at us or at those who support vaccination in general. And so we didn't want our comment space to become its own source of vaccine misinformation. And we also didn't want it to become a source of conflict either. But we also didn't want to restrict speech at the same time either. So what we decided to do is actually just remove our comment section altogether, so that the opportunity to comment wasn't there, and then it wasn't on our staff to monitor them. We'd initially developed a plan with we'll correct the facts and we'll engage with evidence-based resources and things like that. But the problem was we were expecting somewhat more, I would say, questions, about like, well, I heard the vaccine increases the risk of heart attacks, maybe something like that. Is that true? But there weren't questions like that we could really address with scientific information, things like that. They tended to be just so out there, so bizarre in some cases that it didn't even feel like a beginning point for us to engage with, at least through a comment section. So that was the decision that we ended up ultimately deciding to make. But it is a challenge with dealing with a sensitive topic.
But also a great strength that we had, and we learned over time, what was most effective for our return on investment, and social media just really was a key component of our grant. So it worked really well for us. So I think that is it. That is our contact information, as well as our website address, and that is the QR code that takes you to the main MVP website.